Hello, my name is Ernest, and welcome back to another comic book review. Now, this review is going to be about potentially the most controversial comic book movie of the year. And by that, I mean The Flash. I'm sure at this point we've all heard about the Ezra Miller scandals. I put a note in the description saying all I really need to say about that, so let's just start talking about the movie. So, before this movie got released, a lot of people were hyping it up as best comic book movie they've ever seen, or the best DC movie that they've ever seen. Like, even James Gunn was going on that train, and now the movie's out and people aren't liking it as much. They're starting to hate on him. Yet another reason that people are hating him for no reason. Now, I don't think it's the best thing ever, but I don't think it's terrible. I think overall, this is a good, serviceable movie. But it is not like top 3 or even top 5 DCEU. Starting with what I liked, while I do think that people miss the No Way Home of the DCEU, and while I do think that No Way Home is a better movie, I do think that this has a better setup. I do think there is a more understandable motive for why our main character is making such a drastic choice. It's not like Peter Parker going to Doctor Strange and saying, "Hey, can you brainwash the entire world to forget that I'm Spider-Man?" It's instead Barry going back in time to save his parents, his mom from getting killed, and his dad from getting arrested for that murder. And that does at least give this something over No Way Home, even though I do think No Way Home does a lot of things better. One thing that this does do a really good job at, though, is the dynamic between both versions of Barry. For the record, I'm going to call our main Barry, Barry 1, and then the new timeline Barry is Barry 2. So there's going to be short hair is 1, long hair is 2. We got that? Good? Good. So I do think they'll have a really fun dynamic. Like, Barry 2 is almost like this superhero fanboy who's super excited about getting these powers, while the interestingly powerless Barry 1 is kind of there to, he's really just there to ground Barry 2. No, he's the one who's there to say, like, hey, you gotta be careful with your powers, And at the same time, there's this one scene in Keaton's Batcave, and don't worry, we'll talk about Michael Keaton eventually. There's one scene in the Batcave where he's trying to, look up information on Clark Kent because, that's the guy who stopped Zod's invasion in Man of Steel. And both Barrys have this scene where there's a moment earlier in the movie where Barry 1 sees this stuffed monkey that his mom gave to him as like a little gift because she calls him monkey and gives him monkey stuff, but it's pinned to the dartboard via some darts. Obviously Barry wanted to express item to him because he's lost his mother, but it's like he almost takes note of the fact that because Barry 2 hasn't lost anyone, he's kind of taking what he has for granted, and he even calls him out for such during a scene in the Batcave. It's probably one of the movie's best scenes because you can tell how important this whole thing is to Barry 1, how important his parents are to him because he grew up without a mom and even technically without a dad. So yeah, great dynamic between those two. Especially when into the act where things are hopeless and Barry 2 is just relentlessly trying to, fix everything. He's trying to keep Bruce and Kara from dying. And Barry 1 even realizes, like, this is hopeless. No, we have to go back in time and change things. It's stuff like that that I think the movie does really well. And since I brought up Michael Keaton a couple times, even if it was indirectly, they do something. It's almost like this movie acts as sort of a sequel to Batman 89. It's not a sequel to Batman 89, but it almost feels like it because when we first see Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne, he's kind of in this really odd state where he's old and disheveled. He's, completely unshaven. And initially, he just wants to go back to living his life, become his all peaceful. Then he overhears something that Barry says, something that all he wants to do is save his parents. And as someone who's lost his parents, obviously that's something that Bruce sympathizes with. And I think that was the perfect motivation. That was the perfect motive, probably the best motive they could have given him to help the Barrys. And in general, I do think that there is a lot of great Batman action in this movie. So the fact that the director of this film is going to be directing The Brave and the Bold in James Gunn's new universe, honestly, I've got a lot of hope for all for that movie, as well as also Superman Legacy and Swamp Thing, because I've heard pretty good things about the directors of those movies as well. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The last thing I'll say before getting into stuff I wasn't a huge fan of, I just gotta, just gotta devote a whole little section here to the opening scene, because this it's like what the DCEU could have been if Warner Brothers wasn't such a hot mess. Like, if it wasn't for how misguided this universe was, we could have had more scenes and even an entire movie like this opening scene where, of course, you have Batfleck trying to stop a robbery, which is alluded to be by Falcone, Carmine Falcone, but I don't think it's ever really outright stated. Calls Barry. Wonder Woman shows up. Of course, you got some stuff with Albert in there. You get like a news report with Superman, I guess, stopping a volcano from erupting. I don't know what was going on there, but that's not really important. So, moving on. But it really feels like a scene that would take place within a shared universe, which is interesting when you consider that this entire universe didn't really feel like a shared universe. Because when you think about it, it had like 3 different franchises going on all at once. Like, yeah, technically the MCU did that. It actually probably has more franchise, but there's some connectivity there. The Shazam franchise doesn't connect to the Justice League franchise, which doesn't connect to the Harley Quinn and Suicide Squad franchise. There was no real connectivity, but at the very least, there feels like there's some connectivity here. And I really wish that we could have gotten to see more of this universe play out. Okay, that's enough for the good stuff. So, why do I say this movie is just serviceable? Well, I'd say the biggest issue is with the villains. So this movie technically has 2 villains. Of course, we have General Zod, with Michael Shannon reprising the role from Man of Steel. And there's the Dark Flash, who I feel like was kind of meant to be this sort of mini reveal throughout the movie, but they kind of spoiled him in the merchandise. So, again, marketing spoiling stuff for the movie. And they're both set up in different ways to be these big villains. Like, the trailers set up Zod to be like the main villain of the movie. But Flash is set up to be this intimidating threat who's hunting Barry down. But neither of them feel like the final boss, if you know what I mean. They both feel like mini bosses that are simply just obstacles. Like, Zod's barely in the movie as is, and I get if Dark Flash is barely in the movie because I feel like he's kind of just supposed to be like a central antagonist. But both villains are phased out of the movie way too quickly. Zod's caught up in that whole, save Batman and Girl plotline with the 2 berries, and Dark Flash is killed off way too quickly because, in a sense, he's basically Barry too, and let's just say that he ends up killing himself. Please do not take that the wrong way. But moving on from that big issue, because honestly, if that issue was fixed, the movie probably would be better, if they gave us some more time with those 2 villains. There are times where Barry 2 can be a little bit annoying. The fanboying I get, but at the same time, he has a really obnoxious laugh. And some of his college friends did get on my nerves at times. there was also a little bit of thing with Barry 1 as well, where it did feel like he didn't really learn his lesson by the end. Like, the whole point is that, you don't save your mother because you messed up the timeline. Well, but then he saves his dad, because the security footage that would have cleared his name was messed up, so he fixed it, and then we ended up with an elderly George Clooney Batman. What was going on with Aquaman in that mid-credit scene, but it was weird. Well, I can't even call it a mid-credit scene. This movie only really had a post-credit scene, and that's it. But yeah, not a fan of how Barry didn't exactly learn his lesson. And this, honestly, the weird thing about this movie is that it doesn't feel like it wants to be a Flash movie. It's almost as if the movie knows what Ezra Miller was doing in real life, because it puts all of its screen time to Michael Keaton and Sasha Callie, I think that's how you say her last name, I don't know, and even Ben Affleck to an extent. Like, it feels like Barry is mostly a side character in his own movie. The only times when he isn't a side character is when it's the two Barrys by themselves, and then they're doing all the time travel stuff. And that's it. For the most part, he just feels like a side character in his own film. He feels overshadowed by a cameo and then a retelling of this universe's first movie. So, would I say this is a good Flash movie? Kind of. It's hard to tell. Is this a good movie? It's good enough. And good enough at least gets you a 3 out of 5. But at the same time, considering the other movies in this universe, a 3 out of 5 does put you in the lower half of the list. It's good, but it's certainly not a lot of people were making it out to be initially. Anyways, guys, that's going to be my review of The Flash. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. I'm not going to bore you with all the generic stuff. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and Godspeed.